Hello, and welcome to Your IELTS Guide. This is a video series from Guided eLearning all about the IELTS test to give you some tips, advice, and suggestions for taking the test. My name's Paddy, and this is my co-host Rebecca. We are both teachers and materials writers in the world of IELTS. And in this episode, we're going to talk about reading test, strategies and tips for how you can maximize your score.
In this episode, we're talking about reading, and it's worth mentioning from the beginning that reading is not just one skill, it's multiple skills, especially when we talk about IELTS. So two of these skills, or technically speaking, sub-skills that we should discuss are scanning and skimming. Skimming, for instance, would be just reading for the general idea. So to do that, you look at the big things, the title, the beginnings of paragraphs, anything that stands out to get the topic of the text and nothing else. And then when we talk about scanning, it's basically looking for specific information in a text. It could be dates, numbers, names, but you're just looking for that and nothing else, right?
I think the best examples of skimming and scanning are in relation to certain questions. So matching headings questions is a great example of skimming. If you want to figure out the topic of a paragraph, are you going to read every single word in that paragraph in detail? Well, you could if you had 5 hours to take the test, sure, do it. But you don't have 5 hours. In fact, if you've got, let's say, 7 questions, you should be spending about 15 minutes on that, maybe a bit more. So you need to flick your eyes across the paragraph to get a sense of what the general topic is, focus on keywords. That's skimming. If you're doing a sentence completion or a note completion question, you want to find a word which could complete that sentence. And that word is going to be found in a specific part of the text. And you know the type of word you're looking for. You're looking for the name of a machine. You're looking for a year. You're looking for a type of animal, perhaps. So you're going to search the text. You're going to forget everything else. You're just going to look for words which could go in that gap. That would be scanning. You're looking for specific information.
Yes. If we compare this to real life, let's say you're at the airport and in a hurry, and you're literally just looking for your flight, the details of it, the number, etc. You wouldn't look at every other flight on there on the list because you don't have the time and you might also miss your flight. It's the same in the exam. The stakes are high and you can't afford to look at something that is irrelevant to your task.
Definitely. So let's talk about difficulties which students face in the reading test. I think it's fair to say the biggest enemy of students is time. Time is all of our enemy. We have limited time, but in the reading test, more so than anywhere else. And what this means is you can't afford to sit there in a relaxed way and read the whole text. There's a difference between sitting on your sofa on a Sunday afternoon and reading a novel where you're enjoying the experience, you're capturing every sentence, you're trying to get the full meaning of the writer behind every word. That's lovely, but that's not what you're doing in the IELTS test. It might be closer to reading an email from your boss to the whole company. Your department gets mentioned in the 3rd paragraph. Some of the other paragraphs don't apply to you. They don't apply to your job. You can probably ignore them, although they might contain relevant information that you should respond to. However, your name appears in paragraph 4, so you really focus on that sentence. This is probably closer to the IELTS test, where you've got specific information that relates to the question you're trying to find the answer to, and so that's the type of reading that you're doing. Reading the whole text is good. It gives you context, but if you spend too much time doing it, you're going to run out of time. In the academic test, you have got 20 minutes for each text. Now, that's 20 minutes to read the text and answer potentially 14 or 13 questions. Not much time at all. If you spend half of that time reading the text in detail, you're going to be in trouble. So time is probably the biggest enemy. How do you cope with that? Well, it's about developing the skills to answer each question as quickly as possible. And probably the most important skill to develop is identifying keywords. Keywords are how you find the link between the question and the text. Some keywords will be the same in the text and the question. For example, the name of a city. If part of the text talks about the city of San Francisco in America, and there's only one paragraph that talks about San Francisco, great. If a question mentions San Francisco, it's going to be referring to that paragraph, most likely. In other cases, keywords can be paraphrased. So if one paragraph talks about digital technology, then we can expect to see computers or internet mentioned maybe in the question, something like that. So keywords is a way of quickly finding where you should be looking. Another skill to develop, which is not so much related to time, but just an essential skill for the reading test, is paraphrasing. To be honest, most questions in the listening test and the reading test are testing your ability to understand when something is paraphrased. That is how the writers at Cambridge design the test. They create a text or they create an audio script, and then they go, how can we test a student's comprehension of this? Let's write a question that paraphrases part of that text or audio and see if the student has understood that has the same meaning as that part of the text. So you need to work on keywords and you need to work on understanding paraphrasing.
I think there's so much insistence on paraphrasing because it's still very much a human skill. Even now, so many AI tools struggle with this. So if you think about it, it does take a person to do it right, and it does take practice to do it right.
We know that from personal experience of training an AI ourselves to try and do this sort of thing. It's very difficult, isn't it? Another issue that students have, and this is related to time, is getting stuck. It's very easy to want to solve a puzzle. I know this as someone who loves puzzles. I love spending time figuring out the correct solution to something. But sometimes you have to just give up and walk away. It's not a very nice thing for a teacher to say, but it is the correct attitude when you have limited time. You've got 60 minutes to answer 40 questions. On average, that means you should be spending 1.5 minutes on each question. That is not much time at all. If you find yourself spending more than 3 minutes on a question, even more than 2.5 minutes, it's probably not worth it. What you're doing then is you're sacrificing up to 2 future questions for the question that you're on. Each question is worth exactly the same number of points. That's 1 point. So sometimes if you're struggling, just leave it. Come back to it later. If you don't think you have time to come back to it later, guess, move on.
Exactly. Some students might feel it's a matter of pride just coming out of the examination room and saying, I tried to get the most difficult answers, the final ones, I struggled, but I just spent more time on them. But it's not good strategy because you can just focus on the easier questions, get your marks and get a higher score.
Yeah, if you're aiming for a band 9, then fine. But the reality of who needs a band 9 is nobody needs a band 9.
Right. I'm going to talk about something that happens with experts or specialists, and the fact that sometimes they let their own knowledge get in the way of good IELTS practice. Reading practice. So I'm going to talk about someone called Jake, who is a violinist, and he goes into the exam room, he checks out his first text and sees that it's about violins, how violins are made. Because he's passionate about the topic, he gets into it. He spends so much time on this text, 40 minutes, not 20. He works out the specialized vocabulary. He tries to match it to his existing knowledge, to everything he knows about how violins are made and how the music of violins is produced and so forth. So he basically makes every single mistake in the book because he just knows too much about the topic and he lets that get in the way of efficiency. And the lesson is, of course, not to do what he does. Just focus on the text, the task, and then move on.
I think that applies to the students I can think of when you tell me that story are medical students. So many doctors, nurses, medical researchers, pharmacologists take IELTS, the academic IELTS, for their studies and for their job. And in the academic IELTS, you do get texts about medicine. And there is a tendency to say, oh, this is my speciality. And as you say, that actually makes people more likely to spend more time reading the text in detail because they think, I can understand every paragraph. But do you need to understand every paragraph? Maybe the answer is no.
Exactly. Because again, it's a language test. It's not a medical test, a scientific test. Just keep that in mind. And then, like you said, some students just take too long to answer the questions. And this is where scanning techniques come into play. And I'm just going to demonstrate a few. They might look strange, but they do work. So I'll give my advice at the end as well. Imagine this is your text. Now, one way to scan would simply be by going from the bottom to the top like this. Another technique would be like this, kind of centrally. So you try and incorporate as many words in the middle in your reading, your fast reading. Another method would be to go in a zigzag from right to left. This is trickier. Or you can also go from bottom right to left and just keep going like this. Now, I was saying these are strange because they are. It's not how you normally read, but that's the whole point. These will stop you from reading the way you would in normal life. We kept giving the example of reading a novel, which is totally unlike IELTS reading. Now, you can mix and match these methods. You can develop your own scanning style, but my advice would be to just try to avoid natural reading as much as you can.
Yeah, what I notice is that every direction you're talking about is against the flow of a normal sentence. You're swimming up a river.
Exactly.
If you're reading with the text, then your brain is naturally going to follow the narrative of the sentence. But if you're scanning for specific information, that's the opposite of what you want to do. You don't want to comprehend the sentence. You're searching. You're like a drone searching for something specific.
Absolutely. And what about something that often happens when we read? We come across something called distractors, right?
Yeah, distractors are like little traps. I don't think it's completely fair to say traps because the IELTS test is not trying to trick you. However, the IELTS test in the reading and the listening is a test of your comprehension. Does this student understand the text? Now, if you have a multiple choice question and option A is not mentioned in the text, option C is not mentioned in the text, and option D is not mentioned in the text, but option B is mentioned in the text, then obviously the answer is option B. So that would not test your level of English. So in reality, option A, C, and D, even though they're not correct answers, they will refer to something in the text, but maybe it doesn't really paraphrase it, or it doesn't really answer the question. So those three options would be distractors. And then the correct answer is the correct answer. So that's an example of a distractor in a multiple choice question. However, you also get distractors in the text. For example, if you have a sentence completion question where you have to write a word that completes the sentence, there will be multiple words in the text that could complete that sentence grammatically, logically, semantically. And so you need to have an understanding of that sentence in order to know that you've chosen the correct word. So distractors in the question, distractors in the text.
Yes. To me, distractors are about making the answer less obvious, not too easy. It's like looking for treasure and you have a map, but the place where the treasure is buried will not be marked with a big X on it because it's just too simple. Even a child could then find the treasure.
Definitely. The easier the question, the more likely there are to be distractors. So if it's like the ship was built in the year, there's definitely going to be more than 1 year in the text. Otherwise, that's far too easy. So distractors are common in reading. They're very common in the listening test. But how do you cope with distractors? Well, the first step is just understanding that there will be distractors. Knowing that there are distractors, it's kind of like knowing that there could be traps in a room means you're prepared for those traps. You're extra vigilant, you're extra suspicious, and that's good. So, for example, true, false, not given questions. There might be a statement which looks like it matches a sentence in the text, but if you understand that sentence correctly, if you read it carefully, then you will understand that it doesn't really paraphrase it. So maybe the answer's not given, or perhaps in that case the answer's false. So by knowing that distractors exist, you're suspicious of easy solutions. The second one is more difficult. Distractors are there to test your comprehension. So the way to avoid distractors is to understand the meaning of the sentence. That's easy for us because I think it's fair to say we're pretty good readers of English. But if you want to understand the meaning of the sentence, you need to read it in detail. Now, this seems to contradict what you and me were saying before. We were saying you need to learn skimming, you need to learn scanning. It's about reading generally. It's about just finding what you need. Yes, those are how you start the process. But the final step is reading that sentence in detail to make sure you understand it, to see if it paraphrases the question, to see that it contains the same information. And that comprehension comes with reading experience. It comes with improved vocabulary. These are skills that take time to improve. So let's talk about vocabulary.
Right. Well, if we connect vocabulary to the reading test, it's clear that this test tests your vocabulary, but not directly, however, still powerfully. And the first thing I want to talk about is the same as what you've mentioned, this ability to paraphrase, to work with synonyms. For example, if in the text you have a sentence like, the project was abandoned a long time ago, the question might be, why was the project discontinued? And in that instance, when you see the question, you should know that discontinued is a synonym of abandoned. If you don't, you will struggle. This is key. Then we also have the ability to use the context to decipher the meaning of words that maybe you are not that familiar with. And an example would be if the text talks about a costly solution and gives a bit of context for that, you should just know that costly means expensive based on that context. Finally, we have the ability to recognize words that carry strong meaning, such as never or always, because the difference between a word like some and all can make all the difference in the world. If one is the correct answer and the other one is incorrect, then you need to know this difference.
It can be so subtle in some languages. One great example that students really struggle with is the word few. I think there's a question on our website that really tests that. It's like, there were few reasons for doing it. It means there were not many reasons. Yes. It didn't seem like a good idea. But there were a few reasons for doing it is completely different. Yes. It means there were several reasons for doing it. So just the removal of the word from few completely changes the meaning of that sentence. And that would be a very, very difficult question. You're not going to get many of those, but it just shows that subtlety of language.
Absolutely. That's such a good point. And that's why it's worth noticing, well, even if you read very quickly and in a natural way, it's worth noticing those little words. Sometimes if they only have a grammatical purpose, like the definite article the, and with or without it, the meaning is still the same. It doesn't matter. But you need to recognize those instances where the little words do matter, such as in the example that you gave. So then, of course, the question arises, how can you improve your vocabulary for the exam? And there are two things I recommend here. One is about doing something called extensive reading. Stephen Krashen, as an expert, talked about this a lot in his books. And he just said it's a matter of reading anything that you can get your hands on. Of course, you should enjoy it, so focus on the topics that you like. And if you're worried about your level of English, then you should just use something called graded readers. So these would be books whose language level has been adapted to a certain, we call it a CFR level. For instance, if you are B1 or intermediate, you should focus on those books until your level of English is higher. So this is the first step. And it works quite well because according to this expert and also the experience of many students, you just effortlessly pick up new vocabulary since you're enjoying this experience so much. And you're also building up your reading fluency, so the speed of your reading. But then you're supposed to do something else. You need to focus on output, meaning that you can, for instance, write 5 new words, how to use them, and then actually use them, because that's what it takes for new language to be retained, and also for you to make this a part of your active vocabulary.
I think it's really important, that idea of if you want to read a lot, It has to be something you enjoy. If you're just doing IELTS practice tests as your main source of reading, well done, but that's going to get very boring very quickly, and you're not going to develop those reading skills because you're going to either burn out from doing too much IELTS practice or you're just not reading enough. And I think when we say find something you enjoy, there's a tendency for some students to think we're talking about novels. And in some cases that's true. I mean, you and I both love fiction. We love novels and stories. But for some students, they might not read novels in their own language, but maybe they enjoy sports. Maybe they like reading articles about a football match. There's content there for anyone's interest. Whatever you're into, there will be someone who's writing about it. A newspaper article, a blog, something out there. If you don't read in your own language, then think about what you enjoy talking about and find content on that.
Yes, if you're a video game player, you can just read reviews of the best games that you can next play. And this will create a sort of passion within you. And the thing is with reading, you are maybe not that good at it at the beginning, but just like with everything else in life, if you aren't good at cooking, you start cooking, you get better at it, and then you like it more, and you take pride in it. So I think this is a natural result of doing more and more practice.
You just reminded me when I was a teenager and I played a lot of video games, you often look up a walkthrough. A walkthrough is like a guide to where you find little secret treasure in a video game. That's a great thing to read because it's like instructions, very specific directions, and like very, very slight language that indicates where something is hidden. That type of thing would be perfect for reading. Yeah,
something
I'm not
new,
necessarily recommending that to all students, but yeah, might be a good one. Definitely. So that mix of like reading for pleasure, but then also targeted reading where you're trying to extract as much vocabulary as possible.
So then what would you say is the best way to practice and improve your reading?
So the simple answer is do lots of IELTS practice. That's an easy answer to give. I mean, do as many mock tests as you can. But that's an answer to students who have their test coming up very soon. If you have your test in 6 months, then don't do a reading mock test every day. You're going to lose your mind. If you'd like to use articles and texts from outside the world of IELTS, that's fantastic. But you can read those in an active way. So one example is you might read an article. You found an interesting article about, about buffalo, water buffalo in Vietnam and their use in farming. Well, that's something you're interested in. And so you read that article. And then what you can do is you can take 10 keywords you find in that text. They could be words you already know, or they could be new words like plow, irrigation, paddy field, sort of phrases and words that you think are relevant to this text. And then try and write a summary of that article using that language. What you're then doing is showing the ability to use keywords in a different sentence, but in the same context. So that will just test your general comprehension of a test your ability to follow the main ideas of that test. That's a great thing to do. Another thing you can do is extract 5 sentences from that text, write them in a notebook, put the text away, and then try to paraphrase those 5 sentences. So write those sentences in a different way, because what you're doing is you're using the context of that text, because you can't paraphrase unless you know the context. You're using the context of that text and then rewriting it using your own words. That's testing your ability to use different words to say the same thing. And if you can't do it, then that tells you this is an area of vocabulary you need to work on. So you can look up synonyms for those words. You can use dictionaries. You can use something called a thesaurus. A thesaurus is, of course, a dictionary of synonyms. That is a way of finding out what your weaknesses are and expanding your vocabulary in those areas, but also practicing those active reading skills.
Absolutely. I can connect this to what I do in my creative writing. If I have 10 stories in one Word document, I just use the Control-F function to find out how many times I've used one word, just because I wasn't aware of it. It's not something I consciously do, even as a teacher. And then I have to replace as many of those words as possible. But that's not only about synonyms, it's also maybe about changing the sentence structure and making all kinds of linguistic alterations in order to make the meaning the same, but the words different.
Yeah, definitely. Do we have any other tips for takers of the reading test?
Yes, I think there are FAQs. They come up all the time. For instance, whether they should answer the questions in sequence just as they come up. And the obvious answer is yes, just because the texts get progressively longer, more difficult, and it's easier for the brain to deal with something simple before doing something more complex. Same with running. You would do your warm-up first and then run a bit more slowly and then full speed.
I think it's also important to mention that you still need to be careful about time. You don't want to do section 1 in a leisurely pace and do section 2 at a leisurely pace and then like, oh no, I've got 15 minutes to do section 3, which is the hardest section. So be strict with timing. Regardless of where you've got to in section 1, if 20 minutes has passed, move on to section 2. Yeah.
Then there's the question of not really finding an answer for the life of you. You just can't find it. Don't get stuck. Move on. If there's time, come back to it at the end. And if you really can't think of anything, try and guess, because you might be lucky. Spelling is another key issue. How important is spelling? Well, of course, it's crucial. It needs to be perfect. But you have a key advantage here in comparison to listening, and that's the fact that you literally take the words and phrases from the reading texts. You don't need to change them in any way, so that's something that will help you.
Yeah. If you make a spelling mistake in the reading test, you've really no excuse. Yeah, you've no one to blame except yourself. You're just copying it from the text.
True.
In the listening, completely forgivable. But in the reading test, sorry, it's unforgivable.
I always say the listening test is a spelling test as well.
Sure.
Whereas reading, maybe it's reading and vocabulary, right? What about the types of question that we can encounter in the IELTS reading test?
Yeah, so it's important to practice all the types of question. There are some types that are more common than others. Without doubt, there are some types which are more common in certain sections, which are more common in academic compared to general. But honestly, if you are a general training student and you run out of materials for the general training test and you want to use some academic texts, you're still going to be getting good practice. I mean, if you're using IELTS Ready Premium, you're probably not going to run out of materials. We've got quite a lot of mock tests, but it's worth knowing. So the main types of tests, I'll just go through them quickly. We've got multiple choice. Multiple choice is, I think, something everyone is familiar with. In the reading test, it's going to be 4 options, A, B, C, D. There are some types of multiple choice question which we call multiple select, where you have more than 4 options and you select 2, or maybe select 3. Although I think the one where you select 3 is almost eliminated in the reading test. I'm not sure about that one. As we said before, some of those options will be distractors. You can expect to see all of them mentioned in the text somehow, but only one of them, or if it's multiple select, only 2 or 3 of them will be correct answers. This type of question deals with a specific part of the text. So you don't need to read the whole text to get one question correct. Also, they go in order of the test. They go in order of the text. So question 2, if it's multiple choice, will come before question 3 in the text. The next one is matching features or matching information. So in this question type, you'll have a list of names or a list of dates or a list of cities or a list of technologies, and these will all be mentioned in the text. Luckily, they won't be paraphrased. So if you have David Smith, John Wilson, Ruth Jones, they will all be names that appear in the text. So look at the text, find them, circle them, highlight them if you're on computer. Then you will have statements which relate to some of those people, maybe opinions that these people hold, or maybe features of the technologies, or maybe events that happened in those years. And so what you need to do is match those statements to those people. It's testing your ability to recognize whether what the text says about those things is paraphrased in the question. This, I think, is easier to locate the correct part of the text, because they're all mentioned and you can see where they're mentioned. For that reason, the questions do not go in order of the text. That would be too easy if they did. Matching information to paragraph. In this question type, we have a statement or a noun phrase or a concept, and this will paraphrase something mentioned in one of the paragraphs. And you have to say which paragraph contains this information. So this tests your ability to scan the paragraphs for specific keywords and to see if that paragraph contains a mention of it. Then we have sentence endings, slightly less common question these days, but you will have the beginnings of a sentence and the endings of a sentence, and you have to match them together. The complete sentence will paraphrase a part of the text. Another question type, which is quite low frequency, but worth practicing because you might see it, is short answer questions. This is a very traditional, ask you a question and you write the answer. But the answer will always be taken directly from the text. As always, read the instructions. Is it one word only? Is it no more than 2 words? Is it no more than 3 words? Also, as we said before, copy the words from the text. Don't change their spelling. Don't change their form. If it's in a verb form, in infinitive, like give, don't change it to gave. Don't change it to gives. Keep it the same as it is in the text. This advice also applies to sentence completion questions, where you have a sentence and you complete it with a word from the text. Flowchart completion, note completion, all of these involve taking words from the text. You should use the keywords in the question text to locate the correct part of the text and then complete them with a word from the text. These types of question, sentence completion, short answer, they all go in order of the text. Summary completion is one which is very similar, and it also goes in order of the text. The difference with summary completion is that sometimes you use words from the text, and sometimes they give you a word list, A, B, C, D, some words, and you must use those words to complete it. That word list will not come from the text. It will be a separate word list. We have diagram labeling, slightly more common in the academic test. It also involves taking word from the text, although surprisingly, those words do not necessarily go in order in the text. So there might be a part of the text that describes a machine, and you need to take the relevant vocabulary from that description and use it to complete the labels of this diagram. There's 3 more types. Matching headings is, in my opinion, one of the most challenging questions. It's also different to the other question types because it involves a general understanding of the topic of each paragraph. So you will have a paragraph that describes the development of agriculture in South America 1,000 years ago. And there will be a list of headings, and you have to choose the heading which best describes the topic of that paragraph. There will be some distractors in there, and there will be headings that seem to relate to a paragraph, but it's not the topic of the whole paragraph. It's just the topic of part of the paragraph. So be careful with those. And of course, they don't go in order of the text. And then the final 2 are true, false, not given, and yes, no, not given, which are also quite challenging, mostly because students struggle to understand the difference between true, false, and not given. Rebecca, can you help with that?
Yes, I'll focus on an example, but first of all, give the principle. Basically, if an answer is no or false, you must be able to find that the opposite is true in the text. If you can't find the information you need in order to decide, then the answer will be not given. So let's say a text mentions a definition given in the Encyclopedia Britannica, but doesn't evaluate the encyclopedia. So if the question is, for instance, the Encyclopedia Britannica contains the most modern ideas of its time, the answer cannot be no because, again, there's no evaluation of the encyclopedia in the text. The answer can only be not given because you simply cannot make up your mind based on the information available.
Yeah, I think this inclusion of the not given option is what makes it really difficult. Yes and no are actually quite similar because they refer to sort of black and white. It either agrees with the text or it contradicts the text. Whereas not given, it's like, well, it could be true, it could be false, it could be yes, it could be no. We don't know, actually. There's nothing in the text to tell us one way or the other. And that's actually quite a challenging thing.
That's right.
The advice I give to students with true, false, not given, because honestly, it's one that even teachers struggle with. I mean, I've sometimes looked at the answer section of a book and thought, oh, that surprised me. I didn't realize that was the correct answer. You just have to do a lot of them to follow the logic. And I think it's essential that you really pay attention to why you got the answer incorrect. Like on our website, you can see an explanation of why the answer is true, false, or not given, but pay attention to that. Why were you wrong? Why did you think that? Look at the correct answer. Why is it the correct answer? Do you understand the logic there? I think it's really important that students understand that.
Yes, this is one of those tasks where I think no luck is involved. You need to be precise, specific, methodical, and like you said, just look at the justifications of previous answers, where you were correct, where you were incorrect, and learn from that. You can't just assume it will be better by doing practice alone.
Definitely. All right, well, hopefully that's given students an idea of the reading test.
I'm sure it will.
Well, thank you for watching. In the next episode, we are going to be talking about tips and advice for the listening test. Remember, you can do more practice and study on IELTS Ready Premium, our platform for IELTS test takers. Thank you for watching and good luck with your studies.